Hello everyone. Welcome once again to the Self-Knowledge course. Today we will see a very important conference, since one of the bases to achieve self-knowledge and become one with our own divine being involves the creation of the different bodies that will allow our consciousness to have full manifestation in the different dimensions of nature. And, therefore, make all the way back to our Father, to our own being. And to achieve the creation of the internal bodies, it is totally necessary to achieve chastity. And chastity is a virtue that is rescued from the work that we do on our lust. Therefore, the objective of the topic that we will see today will be to identify some of the lustful defects that are important to work on to achieve chastity. Let's then begin this topic by clarifying what is chastity, since we may have misconceptions about it. There is often a misconception that chastity is the same as celibacy, and nothing could be further from the truth, since celibacy goes in the opposite direction. Celibacy moves away from sex in search of God, while chastity is discovering that what divinizes us is latent in our sexual energy, and that our divine part will develop through the wise use we make of this energy. This, by developing purity in our sexual practices with our partner. So, chastity itself is the exact opposite of lust. Chastity is the non-loss of sexual energy, by any means and under any circumstances. It is having the power of using the sexual energy only during sexual practices with our partner, and to never reach orgasm and ejaculation during the sexual practice, but to always make ascend our sexual energy towards our spine to our head. The power of chastity will be born in us, as we understand the value of our sexual energy, and we eliminate all the details of lust that we carry inside us. Those lustful defects lead us to constantly seek to expel it, and sometimes lead us to even lose it involuntarily, as in the cases of nocturnal emissions. So, what we must be clear about is that, if we really want to achieve chastity, we must begin a work of study, understanding, and elimination of our lustful eyes. Only in this way will we have the level of control of our sexual apparatus, and the level of purity in our energy, so that the sacred fire of Kundalini can be ignited within us and can ascend through our spine in the practice of supra-sex with our partner. But when talking about sexual fire, it is good that we keep in mind that there are two types of fire. One is the fire of consciousness, or sacred fire of Kundalini, which is the one that ascends victoriously through the spinal column when we achieve chastity. That is, when we no longer expel sexual energy from our body, because we have already eliminated the fornicating self. And the other type of sexual fire is the fire of the ego, which is the result of fornication. Every time we pour out our sexual energy, that inverted fire develops. And it is that anxious fire that we experience as a sexual desire when lust is activated in us. This inverted fire is represented internally as a tail, also called the kundabuffer organ, which is that tail that comes out of the tailbone in all those demons that we see represented in different paintings and sculptures. The reality is that all of us, thanks to fornication, have thickened that tail throughout our existences. In the astral world we can see that tail, and it is with the development of chastity, and the rise of Kundalini, that we will be able to put an end to that satanic tail that we astrally have. Since the word Kundalini precisely means end of the kundabuffer. The fire of the kundabuffer is a desperate fire, which fills us with anxiety, which leads us to desperately search for ways to masturbate, or look for a partner to excite us to the point of spilling sexual energy, because it is a fire full of lust. The fire of Kundalini, on the contrary, is a controlled, sublime fire, which leads us to make that energy rise in sexual union with our partner, because it is a fire that is the fruit of chastity. Now, we know that our sexual energy is creative, its function will always be to create, since that is the function of our sexual center, to create. Therefore, we must understand that every time we go to a sexual practice, that energy will be doing a creation process. If, for example, we unite sexually with a partner of the opposite sex with the intention of having a child, then the union of the egg and sperm will result in the creation of a physical child. but only one sperm will be needed to create that child. However, the rest of the sperm that are expelled in ejaculation during that copulation will also create, and these will go to create our psychological aggregates, or details of our ego. It is also important to understand that the woman has her own semen, and that by reaching orgasm and expelling her sexual energy in this way, that energy also creates in her more and more details of the ego, which are each of her psychological defects. So, every time we reach orgasm and ejaculation, we are reproducing our ego and sleeping our consciousness more and more. Each of our psychological defects were created through the expulsion of sexual creative energy out of the temple that is our physical body. What is known as the fall of man occurred because sexual energy was expelled from his body. And from that moment we lost everything that deified us. We were expelled from paradise, which were the higher levels of consciousness in which we lived. And the 7 virtues of the soul were inverted, becoming those 7 capital sins or heads of the legion, that by continuing to fornicate, and through the constant untransformed impressions, multiplied until they formed the legion of eyes that we currently carry within us. That is why it is necessary to know that there are 3 types of sexology, or 3 ways to use sex. And understand that the 3 of them will always lead us to create. The first type of sexology, which is the one we teach and encourage to practice, is suprasex or sexual magic. This is sex for regeneration. Through this sex we will recover our lost divine state. Since, if we leave the paradisiacal state through the door of sex, it is through that same door that we are going to return. This is the sex of the gods, since through this sexuality, we will become gods, capable of creating through the word. And thanks to the practice of suprasex, the creation of the children of light will take place within us, which are the existential bodies of the being, so that we can be born in the spiritual world. The second type of sexuality is normal sex. That is sex for generation, since it serves to generate a new organic, physical life, so that the species can reproduce. The important thing that we must understand is that, in normal sex, that is, when we want to have sex with the purpose of having a child, the expulsion of seminal fluid is not necessary either. The expulsion of millions of sperm is not necessary, when only one sperm is needed for pregnancy to occur. But we must just make a request to our particular Divine Mother, so that, during the practice of superior sex, she chooses the most suitable sperm, and directs it to the woman's egg so that conception occurs. It is this method that is really called the Immaculate Conception, where fornication is not necessary for the process of creation of physical children to occur. And the third type of sexuality is infrasex. This is sex for degeneration. This is the type of sexuality that the vast majority of humanity practices. It is the sex that only seeks animal enjoyment, overstimulation, and overexcitement of the sexual organs in order to experience the bestial pleasure of orgasm and ejaculation, expelling in turn all the solar atoms present in the seminal fluid. And by expelling our creative energy, it will reproduce the ego, it will create and feed the children of darkness, which are each of our psychological defects. Hence the importance of understanding that with each fornication our consciousness falls more and more asleep, and we become more and more perverse. And since the path of degeneration is a downward path, along which it is very easy to go down, we very quickly stop experiencing that pleasure with the things we did before. And due to this, we will be always needing newer things, increasingly heavier, and more degenerate things, to continue experiencing that animal pleasure, which is actually everything opposite to true sexual enjoyment. The pleasure that is experienced through infrasex is opposite to the transcendental ecstasy that is obtained through the purification of the practice of suprasex. So, why should we study our lustful eyes? Well, so that we can return from that downward path that we have traveled until now. Also, so that our sexual energy, which we have turned black and heavy due to so much lasciviousness and fornication, now begin to be purified, so that the Kundalini serpent can awaken within us. If we do so, we will be able to make our sexual energy ascend victorious through our spine, so that the regeneration of our physical and vital bodies begins to occur, and the creation of our astral, mental, and causal bodies, which are currently in an embryonic state, occurs. For this creation to take place, we must achieve chastity. We must ensure that we no longer expel our sexual energy either inside or outside of sexual practice with our partner, but rather that we begin to fill ourselves with this powerful energy. Through the study and elimination of all our fornicating selves, we will achieve chastity, and we will increasingly purify our sexual energy, making it increasingly lighter and more subtle, so that it ascends more easily through our spine. And another very important point is that working on our lust will allow us to recover sexual potency, so that there is a lot of potency during sexual practice. Many people already suffer from total sexual impotence due to the damage they have generated to their sexual apparatus through infrasex and through masturbation, and as karma due to so much sexual degeneration that they have brought from many existences. Sexual potency can be totally recovered with the work of eliminating the eyes of fornication, which were precisely the ones that caused this state. It will also be necessary to do objective negotiations with the divine law, to pay that karma by helping humanity receive this knowledge, so that those who wish to do so also have the opportunity to regenerate themselves. Furthermore, as they recover potency, their sexual apparatus will be regenerated and revitalized with the practice of supra-sex. But it is also important to know that those who apparently don't directly suffer from sexual impotence also suffer from impotence, because they have all their sexual potency conditioned to the eyes of lust. So, they are only in the mood to have sex, and there is only erection or lubrication, if there is masturbation, or if there is pornography, or if there is oral or anal masturbation, or if the partner has such a look, or if the partner treats them in such way, etc. And if these things are not there, then there is no sexual potency. What this means is that it is not the person who has sexual potency, that is, it is not his conscious part that activates and manages sexual potency at will, but rather it is lust that has his sexual potency conditioned. So only when we work on all these conditionings, which are all our lustful eyes, and we also work on all the sensations, tensions, emotions, and thoughts that impotence generates, will we gradually recover our sexual potency for consciousness. And we will no longer need infrasexual practices to have potency during sex. This way we can have long supra-sex practices, lasting 1, 2, or 3 hours. Now, how should we study the eyes of lust? We will do it through intimate self-reflection directed by the Divine Mother. This is a work that each one will do in an intimate and personal way, through the meditation technique that we taught in Conference 22. This meditation technique consists of bringing to meditation the scenes of our life in which these eyes have manifested, and observe and discover all the details that manifested in desire, in the mind, in emotion and in sex. Likewise, each sensation that was experienced in the scene of lust that we are meditating on must be observed, judged, and eliminated, so that superior sensations can arise in sexual practice. We are going to observe each lustful emotion, each lascivious or self-justifying thought, and eliminate them detail by detail. Thus, working everything that we know has been manifested to us in this existence. When we seriously begin to do this work, our particular Divine Mother will start guiding us in the astral plane, showing us in our dreams the eyes that we must work on, and bringing to our mind during meditation the scenes we must work on, so that we can advance in this work. To begin this work, it is only necessary to ask ourselves, how many times have I fornicated in this existence, and in what ways? And immediately, we will begin to remember the first lustful eyes that manifested themselves in us in this life. And in the order in which we developed them, we eliminate them. And as I told you, this is a work that will be directed by our Divine Mother. So, if we really want to do this, we will be successful, because on our side is the most powerful force in the world, which is the force of love. This force has an immense creative power, and likewise an immense destructive power, to reduce everything impure in us, to cosmic dust. We are now going to see a diagram, where we will see in summary the mode of operation of lust. Seeing this diagram can help us even to see things that before we didn't even know were lust. Because at this point of social degeneration, where we find ourselves, things of a terribly perverse nature are already accepted as normal. The first thing will be to see that lust, like all eyes, manifests itself through the three heads of betrayal, of which we will talk about in detail in the next conference, which are the desire, the mind and the bad will. In order for us to agree to satisfy it, lust always makes us feel a desire. It activates that fire of the ego, which makes us feel the need to look for ways to sexually stimulate ourselves to reach fornication, which is to spill sexual energy. And in that way, lust ensures the subsistence of the entire ego, since as long as we continue to pour out our sexual energy, the entire ego will have food and life. And for this, the second traitor will always collaborate. This second traitor within us is the egoic mind, which always whispers to us an excuse, a very good justification, so that we agree to expel our sexual energy. And that we always end up falling into bad will, which is to directly reach the action of fornicating, which is the purpose of lust. Therefore, if we want to achieve chastity, we must do intense work of self-observation, understanding and elimination the eye that seeks to spill the sexual energy out of the body, which is fornication. Fornicating means spilling the sexual creative energy in any form. And we reach fornication every time we reach the point of orgasm and ejaculation. The eye of the orgasm must also be worked on. This eye is made up of many justifications, concepts, emotions, and sensations that prompt us to always look for the sensation that causes the release of sexual energy. And there are three means through which we always reach that point: through masturbation, through nocturnal emissions, and through vaginal sex. Let's look at each of them in detail, so that we can see several of the lustful eyes that make them up. This, with the intention of encouraging us to do our particular study, to discover the ways in which these lustful defects have manifested and continue to manifest in us, so that we can eliminate them. Let's look at masturbation. The masturbatory eye is the one that stimulates the sexual apparatus to cause orgasm, in oneself or in another person. This is a psychological defect that urgently needs to be eradicated from our psychology if we want to begin a regeneration process. Masturbation is one of the ways in which most people today begin to expel their sexual energy. Mechanical imagination greatly participates in masturbation, since it is very common for people to imagine a person with whom they fantasize they are having sex with while they are masturbating themselves. This results in the development of a very strong psychological entity, which in the case of women is known as the incubus, and in the case of men it is known as the succubus. This psychological entity, incubus or succubus, through constant masturbation can lead the person to celibacy, not wanting to look for a partner, or feeling that they don't need a partner. On the other hand, it can lead to homosexuality. And this defect can feed itself so much that, through the creative power of the imagination combined with the creative capacity of sexual energy, it can even come to be materialized physically. This entity develops every time the person masturbates, and when masturbating evokes a figure, usually of the opposite sex, to arouse himself. Thus, he creates and develops that terrible entity that then subjects him to the vice of masturbation. This is the entity that commonly appears in people's dreams to have sex with them, and leads them to a nocturnal emission to feed on their sexual energy. Despite what current doctors, sexologists, and others say, the reality is that masturbation is a very pernicious and harmful practice. But to justify its practice, we convince ourselves that in the right measure, it is useful and beneficial, when the reality is that from little comes much. And little by little we feed this psychological entity, until we end up making masturbation a perverse vice, that brings us terrible consequences such as impotence, premature ejaculation, celibacy, and homosexuality. Now, there are two types of masturbation, and we must study both in detail to eliminate all the details of these that we have fed in this existence. These are solitary masturbation, which consists of sexual self-stimulation, and collaborative masturbation, which is when we seek the collaboration of another to stimulate ourselves sexually. In solitary masturbation, the self-homosexual I develops, since every time we stimulate ourselves, we are obviously stimulating and arousing someone of our same sex, which is ourselves. And with this action it becomes normal for us to sexually arouse someone of our same sex. Therefore, masturbation is in principle what later leads us to fall directly into homosexuality. Masturbation usually goes hand in hand with another detail of lust, which is pornography. Pornography is a defect that it is also very necessary that we study in detail in meditation to eliminate it from our interior, since it contaminates our minds and subdues us until it also becomes a terrible vice. When studying to eliminate the masturbating I, it is also important to study the methods we use to stimulate ourselves, since each of them constitutes in itself a detail of this self. If we use any sexual device or toy to please ourselves, such as artificial vaginas or penises, vibrators or dildos, inflatable dolls, etc., we must study all those details and eliminate them. In relation to collaborative masturbation, we find that it is done manually, masturbating others, and being masturbated. But this also includes what we call oral sex and anal sex, which are not really forms of sex, since sex occurs exclusively when the male member is introduced into the female organ. Then, in those cases mentioned, what really occurs is oral and anal masturbation, acts that unfailingly develop the homosexual I. It is then necessary to work on these defects, reviewing in meditation the scenes in which we have nourished these defects in this existence, if this has been the case. There are other forms of masturbation that are even heavier, which are when animals are used to stimulate ourselves sexually, which is known as bestiality, and when corpses are used for the same purpose, which is known as necrophilia. Each one will see in a particular way how far they descended on their degenerative path with this masturbating I, and will work in their intimate self-reflection on all the details that they have nurtured in their existence. Let's now look at nocturnal emission. Nocturnal emission is the loss of sexual energy during sleep. And why does nocturnal emission occur? Well, it is basically because of lasciviousness, because of that repressed sexual desire that in the astral world takes shape and scenario. Then we see ourselves having erotic dreams, and through the silver cord, which always keeps the physical body connected to the astral body, we receive those sensations of overexcitement, causing us to reach orgasm and ejaculation, losing our sexual energy on the physical level. So, what should we work on to eliminate nocturnal emissions? On the one hand, we must work on all sexual impressions that we receive throughout the day through sight, hearing, smell, taste, and touch. Every time we receive a sexual impression, for example, when we see a person that we find sexually attractive, or any image alluding to sex, when we hear something of a sexual nature, a song, a conversation, a sound, etc., or any other impression that we receive from the outside world through our physical senses. If we don't transform it with psychological death, but rather we allow it to activate our sexual energy and remain as a psychological impression, this later transforms into an astral scenario that will take us to lose sexual energy during sleep. On the other hand, is identification. It occurs when we fall into identification with the impressions we receive, and we begin to provoke ourselves by remembering, fantasizing, desiring, and feeding the desire to try and feel, which leads us to fall into psychological sleep. These identifications end up leading us to seek to expel the sexual energy through masturbation or sexual practice. And if not, they remain as a frustrated sexual desire that leads us to lose energy through a nocturnal emission. It is also necessary to study the lustful details that we feed in large quantities during the day through lasciviousness. Lasciviousness is that frustrated sexual desire that we carry in our minds that keeps us thinking about sexual things all day long. We must observe and eliminate our lust when we are looking for something to provoke ourselves sexually, just as when we are looking to provoke others sexually. And this occurs through small actions, thoughts, and lustful desires at every moment. The eye that watches pornography is a detail that must be understood and eliminated from our psyche, since it feeds many lustful details, and in turn, burdens us with many impressions that remain recorded in our mind, causing us nocturnal emissions. Since, on the astral plane, our lustful eyes create the stage to recreate those pornographic scenes. Each of the lustful details that are manifested in us at every moment lead us to imagine lustful things, to speak and do lustful things, to plan, to seek to feel, and to desire. Which will always make us feel the desire to masturbate or look for someone to have sex with, and if not, it will lead us to lose energy through nocturnal emission. Therefore, we are seeing the importance of working on all these details, both in reflective meditation and through the practice of psychological death from moment to moment, to transform the different impressions, so as not to fall into identification, nor end up feeding lust. And in relation to vaginal sex, there are many lustful details that manifest in our emotion, mind, and body. And that when we unite sexually with our partner, prevent us from successfully transmuting our sexual energy. The work we do in eliminating each of these will translate into the potency and self-control we need to have during sexual practice. We must work on the concepts that we have, and that make us justify going to sexual practice to expel our sexual energy. We must also work on the desires and the sensations that we experience in the body, and especially in the erogenous zones. We must eliminate them to recover power over ourselves, which will lead us to gradually begin to experience emotions and sensations of a superior type. We must study and eliminate the details of our lust that expel sexual energy, with the excuse that it is necessary to reproduce. The reproductive eye is the one that seeks to commit fornication, but with the intention of having a partner and starting a family. There we have a lot to study, since, when the person has a stable relationship, they feel that they have license to fornicate, and then they give free rein to all their lust. Then, we must study all the lustful details that were nourished through that path, since we were single, in the process of flirting, in the engagement, during pregnancy, and so on. It is very important to work and eliminate the eyes that like to have sex during pregnancy, or to have sex during the menstrual period. The eyes of contraceptives, abortions, castrations, which lead us to commit serious crimes against nature, and to degenerate more quickly, until they lead us to experience boredom and dissatisfaction. We must work on them and eliminate them from our psychology. A person dissatisfied with his or her partner falls into quite heavy lustful details such as adultery and prostitution. So, it is very important that we work on eliminating these defects. If we have been unfaithful to our partner, observe and eliminate the desires and justifications that led us to commit adultery, as well as the actions we carried out for that purpose. It is also important to eliminate the defect of prostitution, whether we have bought sex, or whether we have sold ourselves sexually. As we can see here, there are many types of prostitution, as well as many forms of adultery, that we must reflect on, meditate on, and eliminate in order to develop true fidelity to our partner and to our energy. The study of the aspect of witchcraft is also important. Witchcraft occurs when the power of sex is already known, and sex is used with dark intentions, to manipulate, to subdue, to carry out some revenge. Love spells, sexual moorings, rapes, etc., also come in here. These that we have mentioned here may seem like many eyes to work with. But the truth is that these are just a few details of the eye of lust, which in reality are thousands and thousands. Each one in their personal study must discover, detail, understand, and eliminate the details that have manifested in them. And what will be the result of the study of our lustful eyes? The result will be the development of that wonderful power that is chastity. We will gradually free ourselves from so much lustful conditioning, from so much lasciviousness and perversity. We will leave the degenerated and weak state in which we currently find ourselves, in which just by seeing or hearing about something sexual, all of our lust is already activated. and we will gradually pass to a state of purity and of self-control. In some of these eyes we will see the process of psychological death, since in the astral we will see how animals, beasts, and entities that internally represent these psychological aggregates die. Also, on the astral plane we will see ourselves washing our hair, and how our hair will grow. Hair in the astral plane represents chastity. Other of these defects will be taken out of our spinal column, and will be thrown into the abyss, to be completely executed in the work of the second mountain. The regeneration process begins with the disintegration of the defects that we know we have. These eyes that we mention today prevent us from achieving fidelity, chastity, and love. To the extent that we study these eyes, we will understand the mistakes we have made, and we will perfect the practices of the supra-sex. I hope that this conference and this explanation have helped you understand the urgent need to work on these defects, if you really want to advance in your spiritual development, and that it has served as guidance to begin your own private study. Thank you very much to everyone who has participated in the conference. As always, we remain at your disposal for any questions you may have. I invite you to the next conference, in which we will talk about treason. There we are going to see in detail the three aspects, or three internal demons that always lead us to betray others and our own conscience. Don't miss it.